Um, Before we get to command, I thought it would be helpful and interesting to take a little road and a little trip down memory lane and talk about some things that maybe some people know about, some people do not. And for me, I know it was interesting just getting to learn more about you and your history. And one of my favorite shows growing up was Sanford and Son. Let me tell you, Red Fox was nothing more than a joy, but to watch him and all that he went through as a star in the 70s was something else. But there were some situations that some people know, some people don't know about, where Red Fox came off the show for a while.
That's right.
And I'd love for you to give us kind of a little background and then talk about where you entered and some of the details there, which I think is really, really spectacular. And it speaks to media diversity. Watch this.
So Red Fox was on Sanford and Son, and he had no windows in his dressing room. He asked them to put windows in his dressing room, and they would not. So Red said, all right, then I'm not going to do the show. So Whitman Mayo, who played Grady on that same show, basically took over the show for whatever number of weeks Red wasn't there. He did a great job. The show continued on. And then when Red came back, after they put windows in his dressing room, Whitman's representative said, we would like, now that Whitman sort of helped you guys out, we'd like to have Grady have his own show. That there should be a show called Grady that stars Whitman Mayo. And the network basically said, no, we don't want to do that. And they said, no, you need to do that. And they sort of forced them into producing this show called Grady. We lasted all of 6 episodes before they took us off the air for a couple of reasons. One, the network had no real desire to keep us on the air. They put us in what was called the graveyard spot on Thursday nights, knowing that we would not get the numbers that we needed to get. And when it came up that we could come right after Sanford and Son, they said no. And the scripts that we were given, strangely enough, the producers had written for a completely different show. I remember turning the channel? This is before.
Some of you may remember.
Some of you may remember. Turning the channel and suddenly coming on to this very white family show. And the script that was being produced was exactly the script I had shot that afternoon, word for word. And that's how the network and this particular show sort of was dealt with. So we were off after 6 weeks, unfortunately, but it is what begins to happen in Hollywood, at least back then. There was kind of 2 sides, because at the very same time, Welcome Back, Kotter was on the air. I don't know if any of you remember that show. Welcome Back, Kotter was a very diversified show, had lots of different people on it. Whereas with our show, which was a black family show, I started off as a professor in university when we did the pilot, and when they tested the pilot, the audiences said, oh, they couldn't believe a black man being a history professor in a university, so they made me a PE teacher in high school. So again, those were the kinds of things that were happening in the 70s. I mean, I started in this business in 1969, and when I started in this business, the most diversified show on Broadway was Hair. James Earl Jones at the same time was doing Great White Hope. I think the only films that were out then were Putney Swope, I don't know if any of you remember that film, Lost Man, which was a Poitier film, and The Learning Tree, a Gordon Parks film. Those were the only 3 films that were out there. Television was Mod Squad, Julia, Room 222. Those were the only sort of so-called dramas on TV. So there wasn't a lot of work for black actors or actors, minority actors on television. So it was always kind of a thing. I mean, my agents and I were always fighting because I would get calls to come in to audition for either gangsters or drug dealers and say, no, I wasn't going to do it. And they couldn't understand why. But that was the 70s. That was 1969.
Excellent. So in 1975, that's when Grady came on. And how many people remember Grady? Does anyone here remember Grady? Oh, you remember the character Grady. How many people remember the show? There's a few people. All right. Fantastic. What's interesting in how things have shifted in some ways, and sometimes they stay the same. But let's move forward. And in 1984, one of what I believe to be one of your favorite films, The Brother from Another Planet.
Yes, still my favorite.
Yeah, love it. Interesting enough, I didn't mention this when we talked earlier, John Sayers.
John Sayles.
Sayles, I'm sorry, that directed, wrote, and edited the
Yes.
film. I also worked on a John Sayles film, Honey Dripper,
Okay.
with Charles S. Dutton and Danny Glover. And what's interesting, you know, and I've done this before. My daughter loves Michael B. Jordan and Creed. She loves Creed and Creed. Now, my daughter is 15 years old, and so when I go to the theater, she says, "Look, Daddy, when I'm watching Creed, do not watch me." And I said, "Why, baby?" She said, "I may be smiling and whatever, just watch Creed." And I'm looking at my baby, and she's smiling at this man. I'm like, leave this alone. But one of the interesting things is I told my daughter, I said, "Well, hey, you know what? I need you to go back and look at Rocky. And I want you to learn the whole story."
Right.
And we sat down and watched Rocky, and we got through it. You know, we were maybe halfway through it. She's like, "Daddy, this not quite like Creed." And then we get to the boxing scenes, and she said, "This boxing sucks. This is nothing. This is horrible." And I said, "Well, baby, this was back in the 80s. I said, "It was great for us." And when I actually watched the film last night, as I was watching the first few scenes, I said, my daughter would say, "These special effects is not what I expect, Daddy." But the story itself carried so much energy as discovery was taking place, and it was discovery of culture. What about it for you? And I remember the scene in the subway, but I'd love to hear from you different scenes and or aspects of that film that really makes it special.
So for those of you who don't know, Brother from Another Planet is a movie about an extraterrestrial who's black. I play the brother who is an escaped slave from his planet and winds up literally on Ellis Island. He has no capacity for speech, but he can heal and fix certain things by touch. So that's the premise of the film. And so what John's idea was is this man who's running away from slavery wanders into Harlem looking as if he should know what's going on, but does not. So the audience gets to see Harlem from his point of view. The things that were interesting about the film was one being on Ellis Island.
Right.
We spent the night on Ellis Island. This was before Ellis Island became a museum, so it was still kind of just a very wide open space. There were no kind of special booths and all the rest of it, and we spent the night there. I can say I've actually seen myself sleep for real on camera, because that shot where you see me sleeping,
Yeah.
I'm actually sleeping. I was wired up. When you see him, he has crashed, landed right off of Ellis. He climbs onto the island, and he's lost his leg. But he has the ability to regrow that leg. But in the meantime, I had to hop around on one foot, wired up with tubes and all kinds of things, wires so that my hand could glow, and tubes for the blood. So I spent the entire night hopping on one foot. And then there's all these wonderful moments in the film. He makes it into Harlem. He sees a black young man being arrested, but he sees it while he's standing in front of a pawn shop, or actually a religious shop. And the religious shop has a picture of a kind of dark man on a cross being crucified. So we think maybe that's what the cops do to black folks in this place that he's in. Other things that happened, you know, when you talk about special effects, my spaceship looked like something that the Little Rascals made. It really did. I mean, we were on a budget of $360,000, and so the woman who was our production designer put this lovely thing together. So from inside, when we shot it, it looked great, but from outside, it looked really like the Little Rascals had made it. In the film, I also have to, I'm looking for others from my planet, and I finally find some words scrawled on a building in my language. And so the production designer sort of designed all of these hieroglyphs for me, and she wrote them on a card. And I said, "Oh, well, let me take the card home so I can figure out for myself what's being said." So I took the card home, and I made up all these things about what was on the card and what was being said, and I came back the next day, and I told her, I said, "This is what it is, and this is how that works," and blah, blah, blah. And she looked at me, and she nodded, and she said, "Yeah, but the card is upside down." Meanwhile, John Sayles, who was the director, was watching us thinking, both of us are crazy for even involving ourselves in this conversation. But what was great about the film is it talked about that there are lots of black people out there who have talent and no channel for that talent to sort of find itself. So here you have a guy who can heal by touch and fix things by touch, and he finds himself out in the street cleaning windshields on cars to make money. So finally he decides this is not going to work, and he goes into another pawn shop and just starts fixing things by touch. He's accused of being lazy when he gets a job working in another game shop, and he fixes all the games by touch. So again, what mostly the film is about is this man who has all these abilities and no place to sort of put them. And he finally gets involved. There's drugs involved in the film, in that you've got a white cartel who's making sure drugs are getting into Harlem. He sort of traces it down vis-a-vis the death of some young boy, and he finds the drug dealer who's doing all of this, manages to do away with the drug dealer. So at the end of the film, he's not only active, but he then goes to that sign that you see, Harlem is where the best ball in the world is played, meaning that's where the best things happen.
Absolutely. I want to take a quick pause, and the gentleman from North Carolina has walked in. Can we please recognize Representative G.K. Butterfield?
Oh. Nice to meet you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you and good afternoon. The worst thing in the world is to come into a gathering and just disrupt the flow of things, and I'm real particular about that. I don't like for people to do it to my programs, and I certainly don't want to do it to Congresswoman Demings' program. But thank you so very much for coming out today to support this work. Congresswoman Demings has been a friend of mine since she ran for Congress the first time. I'm telling some of her business now, but she ran for Congress the first time at our request, at our suggestion, and she ran a hard campaign, but she came up short. But she was determined. She went back to Orlando and recalibrated her campaign and came back with full force. And that time she won the election. She came to Congress, and now she is a force to be reckoned with, not just on the Judiciary Committee, but in the Congress of the United States of America. So thank you. When you support Val Demings, then you support the Congressional Black Caucus. Let me bring greetings to you on behalf of the Congressional Black Caucus, the 55 men and women who comprise the caucus. 53 of us are in the House, and 2 are in the United States Senate, and the 55 of us are just all over the place this week trying to celebrate our 49th anniversary of the founding of the CBC event. This event started in 1971 with a dinner. It was just a dinner at the Sheraton Park Hotel out in Northwest. We started in 1971 with Ozzie Davis as the keynote speaker. His topic of his speech is not the man, but the plan. It's not the rap, but the map. That was his speech in 1971. But over the years, we have started to evolve as a caucus, and now this week is more than a banquet. It is an opportunity for groups of people such as yourselves to get together to talk about some of the great issues that confront the African American community and the broader community. So thank you for those of you who have traveled from out of town. Thank you for coming to Washington this week and making this week the success that it is. Our theme this year is 400 years, our legacy and our possibilities. And that's the theme that we are playing out because, as all of you know, the first African slaves came to America in 1619, and slavery remained a force in the South until 1865, some 246 years. From 1619 to 1865, we had slavery in this country, and it was a very brutal system of slavery. But finally, slavery came to an end in December of 1865. 4 million slaves became free. And from that day, through the use of the 13th Amendment, from that day to this day, it has continued to be a struggle. But thank God we have a Congressional Black Caucus that is engaged every day to try to move the needle in a positive direction, and I hope with your help we will be able to have a good, successful year next year. This is not a political event, so I can't go there with you, but if you can just get involved next year and to make sure that your voice is heard in the next election. Thank you so very much for coming, and thank you, Congresswoman Demings.
Thank you, Representative Butterfield, for your presence and for all that you do. We appreciate you both so very much. And we do have command with us, so we feel like we're in a very safe place, the safest place in the building. I want to move forward a little bit, and I hope you guys can appreciate this little traveling time because there's some key nuggets here that some people know, some people may not know. But did anyone know this man was on Miami Vice?
You know, I got the call to do Miami Vice, and of course, in those days, when you looked at Miami Vice, you thought about it, those great clothes that they wore and all that stuff. I ended up playing a arbitrator, so I wore a brown uniform the entire time.
And a few years later, 1989, Taps, which, I mean, the great Gregory Hines and the phenomenal Sammy Davis Jr. My biggest question really is, did you learn any dance moves? You were with the right people to learn some moves.
Well, I didn't dance, but if you remember, I did scat in that movie. It's funny because Gregory and I were really good friends, and there was a scene where we're supposed to just be really, really angry at each other, and it ended up being the director being angry at us because every time we tried to get angry at each other, all we started to do was laugh. So we were wasting everybody's time. We had a great time doing that movie. We really did.
This is a moment for me as a child of television in the 1980s that was special. And of course, The Cosby Show was on air. I attended a HBCU, and a lot of that, I went to Florida A&M University, a lot of that came from watching A Different World. And so there was a moment on A Different World where there was a kiss with Whittley, with Miss Jasmine Guy, that was intense. So let's talk about that.
So I'll do this a little bit backwards. So after shooting, I think I shot 6 episodes of the show. And then I came back to Brooklyn where I happened to be living at the time. And I tried to get on the subway. And in those days, you had to buy a token. And I went to the token booth and tried to buy the token. And the woman in the token booth said, "Oh, no, I'm not going to sell it to you. No, you were on that show. And you kissed Jasmine Guy." And I said, "Oh, well, thank you very much." And I took the token and put it in and crossed the turnstile. And there were 2 policemen on the other side. And all they wanted to talk about was what was it like to kiss Jasmine Guy. So, but here's the secret. Here's the secret. So in rehearsal, you know, you rehearse all these things, and we would kiss during rehearsal. Some 30 years later, I did TV One about my career, and Jasmine was part of the show, and she talked about when we worked together. And it turns out that at the time, Jasmine never kissed anybody else during rehearsal except for me. Which I had no idea until 30 years later that she, at the time, had a crush on Joe Morton.
That's because she knew you were going to be command. She was like, listen.
Oh, that's the other thing. So now people think I became command because I got left at the altar.
So then that same year, Terminator 2
Yes.
was a big budget film. And James Cameron, you know, the sci-fi film, this is where, you know, they spend money like none other when doing big budgets like this.
That's right.
But I know there was some interesting things about black folks. What was it that James said to you about black people in sci-fi?
Well, no, it wasn't James. Instead of auditioning, he sort of interviewed a lot of actors. I mean, it was like a homecoming week. We all sat in a room and talked to each other while he interviewed everyone. And when I came in, he said, "Why is it that you want to do this role? What's important to you about doing this role?" And I said, "Oh, it's a joke that Richard Pryor told." And he said, "What's that?" I said, "Well, Richard said that the reason that Hollywood kills us off at the beginning of sci-fi movies, or we're not in sci-fi movies at all, is because Hollywood doesn't think we're going to be here in the future." And I got the role.
Know your history, people. Know your history. That's all right. That was good. That was a good one. 1995, The Inkwell came out. As a matter of fact, I had my first trip this year to Martha's Vineyard. I saw The Inkwell. That was one of my first stopping places.
Which is not as big as it looks in the movie.
Not at all. I was like, where is The Inkwell?
Yeah,
they were
exactly.
Like, we just passed it.
It is, exactly. It's really tiny.
But it sounds like it was a fun movie.
We had a great time. As a matter of fact, we had so much fun on that movie, we thought, oh, this movie is just going to bomb, because we were just having way too much fun. It's also during that period, because Matty Rich was the director of that film, and he had done Straight Outta Brooklyn, which was like a $5,000 or $10,000, whatever he spent on that first film, and made millions. So that was the way Hollywood started looking at black directors and black film. They were looking, and they still do today.
Yes, they
They're
do.
still looking for that small, tiny little film where they are only going to spend a very small budget. I mean, most budgets for African American films these days, except for two that I can think of, the budget never goes more than $45 million. Never, or seldom, I should say. The only two that I know that have gone beyond that are A Wrinkle in Time that Ava DuVernay did, which was $100 million, and of course Black Panther, which was $200 million. The interesting thing about that fact is that what Black Panther did was put a huge crack in the myth of no foreign market for black film. It's something we've been fighting for a very long time. I think that fight is still going on.
It is.
But that film sort of said it can happen. Now, the only caveat I put to all of that is that film and 12 Years a Slave both did really well in a foreign market. Both of those films also had a plethora of English actors, black English actors who were in those films. And so those actors had a fan base in Europe, so it made monetary sense, financial sense for them to do the way they'd done it. So what needs to happen now is we need to go further and prove that it's just story that we're talking about. It's not who's in the film necessarily, although if you have Will Smith or Morgan Freeman, the rest of it is going to do well. And from my point of view, we need to tell other stories. The stories, other than the two that I just mentioned, most stories that involve African Americans are usually about equality and slavery. We need to get, those stories should be told. We need to tell those stories. But there's so many other stories, so many other things that we've involved in.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. You know, Cassandra Butcher, who was here earlier, her and I both worked on 12 Years a Slave. As I was sharing with you, Chiwetel Ejiofor was our lead actor,
Right.
who has a international audience, and that's why the film was able to go that direction. Cassandra and I dealt with this really interesting scenario where when the film went international, they sent me the creative, and my job as a marketer is I was responsible to make sure the creative was on point. Well, the poster that you guys saw for 12 Years a Slave has Chiwetel running, looks like he's running on the side, across the film. And the poster they sent us from overseas was a big picture of Brad Pitt. And then it said 12 Years a Slave. And so I copied the image down and sent it over to the studio, and I said, hey, we need to have a meeting immediately. And I recognize, and this is the level, I think, what I believe of ignorance and sometimes just all out disrespect. Even when we step into other markets, when I said to them, I said, well, hey, Chiwetel Ejiofor is the star of this film. The creative has been locked for years. Why is Brad Pitt on the, then it says 12 Years a Slave. I said, there's no real connection there. They said, well, Brad Pitt is just a bigger star. And I said, but he's not what the movie is about. Nor does it make us any sense to have Brad Pitt with the title 12 Years a Slave. I do not know when Brad Pitt was a slave for 12 years. And so they changed the creative as was necessary, but it's just interesting because those markets are very powerful for us. And I was telling folks earlier, I have a film now that's in international. My Aretha Franklin documentary is international and it's going out, but it's so tough when I deal with the sales agents, just for them to even talk about it the right way. And I have to remind them, Aretha Franklin was a global superstar. She was not a pop star that just put out a few hits.
Right.
This woman is a legend. And so I have to help them in crafting their dialogue. So what that tells me sometimes is not just that we want our films to go further. I think we have to go further.
Yes.
Meaning we have, and one of the things I'm saying is, I told the young lady earlier, if you want to get into this space, be prepared to fly to Berlin. You need to go to Cannes. You need to be in Amsterdam. You have to be there as a representative of these projects, and not just in screen, but also in person.
Yes.
To speak to those to help them understand what the opportunity really looks like. But I'll tell you this, when the money comes to the door, trust me, no one is upset. Our stories do sell. Never believe they don't. they do sell. It's a matter of having the right people in place.
It's absolutely true. I mean, I think that I was talking about slavery tales and equality tales before. I think Hollywood is set up. They know how to sell those. That's what they've done in the past. That's something that they can put their minds around. It's when you present other stories that suddenly things get a little sticky because they've never done that before, and they have there's no prerequisite as to how do I do that. And instead of talking to someone like yourself and figuring it out, they just simply take the shortcut, which is, oh, we'll just put Brad Pitt up there and then that'll sell it.
Yeah. You know, another interesting fact is while Black Panther did phenomenal numbers, and you know, $1 billion later, Tyler Perry has a conversation with me and he says, okay, so Tirrell, who retired off of that $1 billion? And I sat back and I said, well, Ryan Coogler is on to his next movie. I said, Michael B. Jordan, he's still working. I said, Chadwick Boseman is still working. I said, I don't think anybody retired. I think we all showed up at the theater. We had a great time. He said, well, where did the $1 billion go? And what Tyler said to me next really is what changed, and it is changing the course of how I think about the business. He says, you guys spend a lot of time putting nails and hammering nails in other people's houses. When are you going to start hammering the nails on your own house? And after that conversation, you know, I've run a marketing agency for 19 years. That's when I decided maybe I need to start producing some of these films myself.
Yes.
Because if our stories are to be told, I can complain about the fact that I don't see these stories, or I can just start and go make these stories myself and help them get out. I appreciate Tyler for saying it, but I also appreciate the fact that he's an example, as you are, as an example of someone that says, hey, I'm gonna get out on the forefront, on the battlefield and participate, not just talk about the problem.
Ava is another one, Ava DuVernay is
Exactly.
another one. She has an organization that helps young Black filmmakers get their films out there. The films that she chooses to do, like 13th and The Way They See Us, are just brilliant, and they're other kinds of stories. But I think you're right. I think the only way, the two things I think that are important to Black films is exactly what you were saying, and also you, the audience. The year of Oscar So White, I kept thinking, it's too late. You already spent the money to go see the movie, which made the movie popular. If you want something different, then you go see Moonlight first. Maybe you don't see La La Land first. You know, maybe you go see the Black films first. That's the only way these things grow, is we need your support.
That's true. Before we leave this section, I definitely want to talk about Scandal. Who wants to talk about Scandal? All right. There are a few Scandal fans in the room. Some of you were here at the beginning where we ran the sizzle reel. We want to take a second. There is, you know, there are 3 minutes. There are 3 minutes in the show that I felt really defined you as Papa Pope. I think, yeah. Now, let's hold up a second. Now, the great thing is I think the character was already in place. And, you know, the character storyline and the character arc was already being built. But I felt as though, as I, you know, was doing research and I spent last night and the last couple of nights just going back and looking at episodes and getting a feel for, you know, just refreshing myself. But these 3 minutes, this is at the start of season 3, I felt in that moment as a father, a Black father on network television with a Black daughter.
Right.
There was a conversation that was very clear of conscious of being not just an actor, it felt real. And I don't know if you guys have had those moments where the character kind of dissipates and goes away, and the person on screen, you're like, that man is her father. He just spoke. And the reaction the reaction of Kerry Washington, I think, also played heavy into that she felt that as well.
All right, so before you show this, the one thing many of you may not know is when I got the call for Scandal, first of all, when I got to LA, I was looking for a pilot. I was deliberately looking for a very smart bad guy. I spent most of my career playing good guys. I was looking for someone who was a bad guy but smart. No sooner did I think that than the phone rang. This is for real. The phone rang, my agent said, ABC wants to talk to you about coming on Scandal. And I'd only seen a few episodes of the first season. I picked up the phone and they explained what they wanted me to do, which essentially was, at the end of season 2, the last 2 lines will identify you as her father. Now, I was the only one who knew that. Kerry didn't know that. The director, because he was one of the producers, he knew that. None of the other cast members knew anything about that. So what it allowed me to do is the character is filled with secrets. So it allowed me for the entire first 6 episodes that I did at the end of season 2 to carry this secret. And then, because even at the table read for the cast, when it got to the end of the script, because we're not allowed to read through the script before the table read. So when we got to the end of the script at the table read for that particular episode, and she turns to me and I say hello and she says, Dad, the entire cast leapt up and went crazy. So that was how that started. So by the time we came back at the top of season 3, Kerry and I had at that point I'd met her father for real, and so we'd had an opportunity to sort of become that father and daughter. And we shot that scene about hello Dad at least 4 or 5 different ways because we didn't know what their relationship was.
Right. Let's run the clip. And then we'll talk. We're going to break this clip down, all right? Let's run the clip.
Without making a sound. If only you'd been this quiet as a child.
Why did you try to have me killed?
I didn't try to have you killed. I tried to have Jake Ballard killed. We're here.
No.
You've gotten yourself into a bit of trouble, Olivia, and I'm here to fix it.
No.
Now listen to me. You raised your skirt and opened your knees and gave it away to a man with too much power. You're not rare, you're not special. Your story's no different than 1,000 other stories in this town. So you know how this goes. You could call this in your sleep. First they'll smile, be warm, sympathetic, on your side, letting you know that they will fight for you. They will lull you into a false sense of security. And then, once your belly is exposed, they will gut you and everyone you know. And they will be swift about it. And by the time you realize you should be fighting back, well, you're already bleeding to death. That is the presidency versus you. Whose victory do you think they will fight for? Whose body do you think they will bury?
He would never.
He would never. You and I both know that he is not in charge. He is never in charge. Power is in charge. Power got him elected. I know more than you could possibly imagine about things of which you cannot dream. He told you that you would be First Lady. You believed him. Did I not raise you for better? How many times have I told you you have to be what? You have to be what?
Twice.
What?
Twice as good.
Twice as good as them to get half of what they have. Sleeping with that. For God's sakes, you know to aim higher. At the very least, you could have aimed for Chief of Staff, Secretary of State, First Lady. Do you have to be so mediocre? Your staff will be taken care of financially. Your business will continue to run. Money is not a problem. There's always money. Money bought that plane. Money bought the silence of the gentleman who will fly that plane. On board, you will find an envelope. It contains a passport, a Swiss bank book, a Go file, an entirely new identity. There is a very nice island waiting for you at the end of the flight. You will stay there for 8 months. Then I can arrange a place for you in Brussels, Thailand, if you prefer, Johannesburg, any place but here, really, as long as you disappear.
What if I don't want to go?
Olivia, you're getting on that plane, come hell or high water. And to be clear, I am the hell and the high water.
So let me say this. so hold up. So listen. I remember sitting in front of the TV when Michael Jackson did the moonwalk, right? So there are these defining moments. But when I watch this, I almost grabbed my pearls like, oh, Jesus. I felt everything in there. I want to spend a few minutes breaking it down because it's such a powerful moment on television, but the acting is incredible. I mean, again, your character arc was already there, but it was a defining moment. So before I go too deep in breaking it down, give me your POV. And I know you talked about how you got into it and you talked about the script side of it, but I'm really thinking about just the actual shot.
I think for most television, actors are not given monologues, right? You're given a few words to say. There's a dialogue that goes back and forth. This was the very first thing we shot at the beginning of season 3. So imagine being an actor, you open up your script and you've got a 2.5-page monologue. I, before then, had been on my way to Broadway to do Romeo and Juliet, to play Capulet in Romeo and Juliet, and was convinced by Shonda Rhimes that maybe I should stick around. So for me, because that was, up until that point, the only thing that character had done was sit in the dark on a bench and hand out envelopes and tell people to go kill so-and-so. So that was the very first time you really heard him speak. So that was his entrance into this world. So for me, it was enormously important that I establish any number of different things. One, as you say, her father. That was most important. This character is a guy who is in conflict all the time between running the country and keeping his daughter safe, since his daughter is having an affair with the President of the United States. Those things are constantly in balance for him. So for me, it was to make sure that when I spoke to her as her father. I have 2 daughters as well. To speak to her as her father, but also speak to her as someone who is running the country. Nobody at that point knows that but me. But those are the 2 things that were most important in that speech.
Absolutely. You know, and I'm just going to break down a few parts of it. You know, again, we have daughters, so when you say, hey, raise your skirt, open your knees, and gave it away to a man with way too much power. And I'm just going to give out a few of these lines. It just jumped out at me.
Melvin Van Peebles once said, don't play yourself cheap.
That's right. That's right. And then you say, he would never. He is not in charge. Power is in charge.
I was thinking, I'm in charge.
And then, you know, this is the one. It says, didn't I raise you for better? You have to be what? Well, hold up. Before she even spoke, he said, what? Twice. And she started twice. What? Twice as good as them to get half.
And how many of you have heard your parents say that,
Come
or
on
have
now.
you said that to your yes?
And then you know to aim higher. Do you have to be so mediocre? First lady? I said, woo. And then, of course, I think the end of it, you know, I am the hell and high water. Yeah, listen, let my girl step out of line. I got my speech. It's already recorded and well. And the great thing is, I didn't bring the clip. There's another monologue that I think was ultra defining. Many of you saw it because it was part of the final episode, and it was as you sat at the table in front of the the Senate, I believe it was.
Yes, right.
And you began to really help them understand who was this was a catalog of white men, and you effectively told them, you know, I run this. And when you guys figure out that it's a black man, good luck.
Well, the other thing I say to them is that your problem is that you're complacent.
Yeah.
And you have allowed that complacency to ruin you. But in the meantime, I'm going to fix it because I'm running the country and
Yeah.
had been running the country.
Yeah. Man. So, magnificent television, but magnificent acting. I love every moment, every moment, every moment, every moment, every moment.
You have to give props, though, to Shonda Rhimes.
Yeah.
I mean, she thought up these characters. Up until this point, and even now after this point, I have never seen a show that has a beautiful woman who is the lead in that show who happens to be black, and her father who happens to be running the country who is also black. That just, in our sort of lexicon of television, that doesn't exist. And so for Shonda to put it out there was tremendous. I mean, when the show ended, I was telling someone earlier today, we went on the Ellen DeGeneres show because she loved the show and blah, blah, blah. And she asked me at one point, she said, you know, because of all the terrible things that you did you think that you were going to be killed off? I said, no. She said, well, no, wait, but why? And I said, well, there was nothing in what Shonda wrote for me that led me to believe that she was going to kill this character off. She was able to say so many things about our position in this country, and especially this guy's now in power as well, that no other character in the show could say. So there was no way she was going to kill that character off. In fact, there was a point at which, I don't know if you remember, I think it's my ex-wife comes and stabs me. Two things that I heard about that. One is that there were prayer circles all around the country.
Praying for Papa.
And two, the producers actually, because Carrie and I were shooting another scene from another episode, and the producers actually came down and said, listen, something terrible is going to happen to you in the show. Don't worry about it. You're going to be fine. So from that point on, I thought, oh, well, then I'm not going to worry about it ever again.
That's all right. So listen, we have a few minutes. If you have questions, I'm going to ask you to line up. We're only going to be able to take a few. Again, I want you to be mindful. No long statements, no long soliloquies. This is not the time for your monologue. We definitely want a question. We're only going to be able to take a few, so hustle. But here's one of the things that I think is really great, and I want you to pay attention to this because it happens in black TV that I love, and just television in general, but for our stories, is that similar to Felicia Rashad, who will forever be my TV mama. I don't know about you, but for my generation, Felicia Rashad is my mama. I see it, I hear those stories, I hear it from the Cosby Show, her grace, her elegance, all of that just spoke so much to me as a young child. It's excellent to see how you have become an on-screen father. and it's not just here. The great thing is in 2017 with Justice League and Cyborg, right. You were the father. And now, how many people are watching God Friended Me? And here is our father and minister and priest. But thank you so much for all that you have been doing in that space.
Thank you.
We'll start with this first question.
Mr. Morton, thank you so much for coming. Huge fan. The late Wayne Dyer wrote a book called Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life. And you just said something that was powerful. You said you thought about this character when you went out. Can you talk about the power of thought and how that has shaped your career?
Whenever I play a character, there are 5 questions that I ask myself for almost every single word in the script. They are, who am I? And that doesn't just mean what's my name. It means who am I? Where am I going? Which means any number of different things. It could mean physically, where am I going? It could mean psychologically, where am I going? Who do I expect to meet? Pretty clear. And then the last two are the most important. What do I want, and to what extent am I willing to go to get what I want? So that even though you have a script in front of you and it kind of tells you who wins the argument and who loses the argument, it depends on how much you're willing to go after that argument that makes the scene dynamic, that suddenly you have life. And so that's how I think about most of the characters that I play.
Yeah, I just want to say, from a consumer standpoint, it seems to me that with Amazon and with Netflix, we sort of have almost like a black renaissance. It's just this flood of new media. I mean, all of these various shows that focus on black content. Do you perceive it in that way from an insider's point of view, or do you have some reservations about the advent of streaming media in this space and what we're doing?
I do perceive it that way. The only difference is it's not the first time that it's happened. You know, when Brother from Another Planet came out, that was another renaissance for black film. Mm-hmm. When Spike Lee started to do his thing, that was another renaissance. So these things happen over and over again. The thing that's been great is as each wave, as it were, has happened, those waves have gotten bigger and better, and that I'm very happy for.
I'm a huge fan of your work.
Thank you.
What advice would you have for a young black man trying to pursue acting?
My advice, generally speaking, is do theater first. Before you get in front of any camera, do theater first. If you can stand in front of an audience and keep a character fresh for, let's say, 3 to 6 months, if you could do that 8 times a week, and you're using your whole body and your whole voice, if you can do that, television and film becomes a lot easier. What happens is television and film can put you into some really bad habits. I don't know if you notice, if you watch soap operas, actors in soap operas have a tendency to talk like this all the time, and that's just the worst. Yeah. Whenever I'm directing for television, I always say to actors, I want to hear your whole voice. Don't start whispering. What happens in television and film often is you're not using your body, because television especially is, the landscape is your face. So again, it's to understand that there is something connected to your face. It's called the rest of your body. So those things, that's why I say to most young actors, if you want to be an actor, two things actually. Get an education, nothing worse than a stupid actor. And then, truly, get training as an actor, in that, you don't want to go to a doctor who's never been to a medical school. You don't want an actor in front of you who doesn't know what he or she is doing. And then once you've accomplished those two things, then I would say do theater. Be in front of a live audience and work your craft in front of a live audience. If you can do that, you can do anything.
Outstanding.
Good afternoon. As I watch Scandal, there are many oftentimes you gave us an insight into what Command was thinking on Twitter. You
Yes.
actually took that role to another level. So my question to you is, was that something that you came up with, or was that something you were encouraged to do? How did that come about? Because I found myself watching Scandal on 2 screens, one the TV screen and one my phone, to see what Command was really thinking.
Well, when you joined the cast, you were told that they would like you to, there was no obligation, that they would like you to tweet live with the show when it comes on. And so I thought, well, how do I do that without really sounding either boastful or just plain stupid? So what I decided to do was to tweet kind of in character, and kind of not. And that was a lot of fun. I mean, to the point that sometimes when I went after Tony Goldwyn with my tweets, he would say, wait, you're doing this in character, right? And I would say, yes. So that was the idea, is to tweet in character, which is why I started tweeting according to the Book of Rowan.
Love it.
Yes, Joe, I'm Russell Williams. I had the honor of working with you on Terrorist on Trial back in '88. What role have you not played that you want to play?
I'm working, getting ready to do a workshop on King Lear, so love it.
My name is Barbara Ndahendekira, and I'm from Uganda. I saw this film and I loved it. They have been acting about Idi Amin, who was a little bit of a good person for Uganda's development, though he became a dictator. But we have another dictator who I would want to see if you could act him, or a young man who's running after him and he is a musician coming up as a politician. He signed into becoming a.
Who's the musician?
He's called Bobby Wine, that's his nickname, but Honorable Chagulanyi is his name. And he became from a ghetto to a musician, and now member of parliament. Now he's running for presidency. He's been tortured and almost left to dead. But I would love, like Africa, to have somebody to act this and show the world what Africa is going through. Thank you.
Is there a book that I can read, or is it all in the newspaper?
All in the newspaper.
Okay. Yes. All right. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Courtney. One thing that I wanted to ask is, as a black person in Hollywood, you said that you really thought about the certain roles that you took, specifically this one. And so, Mr. Tirrell here, you mentioned earlier that Tyler Perry said we need to start building nails within our own houses rather than other people's. So, what do you all feel, not just for actors and actresses that are black in Hollywood, but people in general that are in the world that we live in, working in corporate America and things of that sort, what requirements and criteria do you think there is for jobs that we need to turn down in order to help build our community?
I'm not so sure about jobs you should turn down, as I think earlier in one of the other panels, somebody said build a collective. And I think that's the positive way to get this done. If you're interested in being in the film business, then find a cameraman, find someone who's interested in producing, find a writer, find actors, find people who are interested in set design and all the rest of it, and put a company together. If it was theater, they would call it a repertory company, so that you can do different kinds of things. And maybe start off by doing shorts instead of trying to do features right away. But I think maybe that's the way to find out what part of this business you are most attracted to.
Yeah, and I'm an ordained deacon, and so my response would be that, God has placed a talent in all of us. And one of the worst things when I talk to people is when I feel as though they have not become in tune with God to discover their talent. And I tell people, you have to go to Him and discover your talent. But then when He reveals your talent, ask for discernment and chase after it as if you were running for your life. Because that is where you will find a certain level of peace that you will find no place else, is when you find and you discover and you chase after the talent that God has deposited in you. We all have it. The key is discovering it.
It's wonderful. My name is Dennis White. How you doing?
Hey.
So you recently played Dick Gregory in a play.
Yes.
Have you considered turning into a feature?
Yes, I'm actually kind of working on that now. Yes.
Okay.
The play was called Turn Me Loose. It was about the life of Dick Gregory, both as a comedian and as an activist. We did it off-Broadway in New York. I think somebody did it here in Washington, D.C., only because I was not available. I hated every minute of it. But yes, I think we're still trying to get it on Broadway, but yes, I think we will turn it into a feature.
Tirrell, would you produce that?
I would.
Then we should talk.
Then I want that. Thank you. That's a good setup. That's how you throw me to alley-oop.
Hi, Mr. Morton. My name is Robert Dean. I'm from Detroit, and I first saw you in Terminator, but the Scandal role was just so unique. And how do we fight more of these stereotypes that we see, of black characters?
Don't do them.
Wow.
And is there anyone that you kind of tried to channel, or what was your inspiration as far as the way that you portrayed Papa Pope?
My father was a captain in the United States Army. His job was to integrate the armed forces overseas. That meant when we were stationed, when we were sent to a post, we arrived racially unannounced, and literally the stuff would hit the fan. He was imprisoned once for supposedly impersonating an officer. I was in fights most of the time with young white kids who lived on the post. My mother, they have officers' clubs and officers' wives' teas, and all of the wives deal with each other according to their husband's rank. So even the fact that my mother's husband was a captain, they treated her less than that because he was black. So a lot of that is in that character.
Thank you so much. And would you comment on the show 24 and like how they first had Dennis Hayward as president that kind of
You know what? I
some
can't
doors.
comment on 24 because I never really saw it. This is going to sound very strange, but I really don't watch much television. If I turn on my TV, it's usually news or a movie.
Yeah. We want to now ask the curator of Black Women Magic, the great Representative Val Demings, to come up and give us some closing remarks.
But I do want to present to you this certificate of special congressional recognition presented to Joe Morton in recognition of your outstanding and invaluable service and career. You all please join me in giving him a round of applause.
Thank you so much.
Bless you. God bless you.
Thank you. I've been talking all this time, so I'm not going to give you a speech or anything. But thank you for this, and for, I suppose, all of you younger, aspiring filmmakers and writers and producers and directors. What Tirrell said is the truth. You find the truth inside yourself. You find it every single day. You find it with every obstacle you have to overcome. You find it with every time you overcome that obstacle. And the idea is to let all of that grow as you grow and take that experience and thrive off of that experience. And the more you do that, the more you end up being someone like Tirrell or like our representative here.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. God bless you. Thank you.